Uh, Today we want to start the Paticca Samuppada lesson 5. Paticca Samuppada, is there anybody who don't know Paticca Samuppada? I think everybody knows. So my task is very simple. Today I want to start with a stanza from Sutta Nipata. From now on, every class I start with some stanzas from Sutta Nipata. Sutta Nipata is one of the minor books. It's called minor section of Tipitaka. So I don't have time to go about the history of or the Buddhist literature and so forth. That is very complicated thing. Now there we have a chapter called two kinds of mindfulness. In Pali it is called Dvayata Anupassana. Anupassana, two kinds of mindfulness. And these stanzas are taken from that chapter. The stanza you can read, those who do not understand suffering or the origin of suffering, who do not know where suffering completely cease without remainder, and who do not know the path that leads to the allaying of suffering, overcoming suffering. Now, this might sound something that you are familiar with. We were here when we discussed, some of you were here, when we discussed Sammaditthi Sutta, discourse number 9 in Majjhima Nikaya. Majjhima Nikaya Sutta number 9 also discusses right view. In that discourse, Venerable Sariputta explained right view in 16 ways. One of the last, penultimate one, before the last one, was avidya, ignorance. In that sense, all of us are ignorant. Don't get offended when I say we are ignorant. If we are not ignorant, none of us would be here today. We all would have attained full enlightenment. So he explained what right view is, or right, what you call avidya, ignorance. He explained. In other places also, Buddha explained ignorance. In brief, what do you know, what do you understand ignorance? What is ignorance? In brief. Not knowing the Four Noble Truth. Not knowing the Four Noble Truth is ignorance. And that is what it is spelled out here. In this stanza, those who do not understand suffering. Now, some people think that they understand suffering. No, friends. They are deceiving themselves, cheating themselves. Without knowing suffering, they say they understand suffering. They don't understand suffering. They don't understand the cause of suffering, the end of suffering, and the path leading to the end of suffering. They don't understand. when you go through these lessons, we will come across how much wisdom we have, how knowledge or vision we have, avidya, vidya. The opposite of avidya is vidya. Where there is avidya, there is no vidya. Where there is avidya, there is greed, hatred, delusion, all kind of other defilements are there. Now we must remember we are talking about dependent origination. I think you all know the formula of dependent origination. Very simple formula. Can you repeat, tell me what the formula is? You, yeah?
When this is, this also is. When this is, this also is. And then there's just 12 steps.
Right. When this is, this is. When this arises, this arises. When this is not, this is not. When this passes away, this passes away. This is a very simple, like algebra. You can never make any mistake if you remember this formula. So, when there is ignorance, what we expect? Suffering expect. When there is ignorance, greed expects. When there is ignorance, greed also is there. When there is ignorance, suffering also is there. This is how we have to apply this formula. Now, as this class is Pali and Dhamma, I like to read the Pali as well, at least for you to hear Pali pronunciation. Ye dukkhaṃ nappajānanti ato dukkhassya sambhavam yatthaca sabbaso dukkhaṃ asesaṃ uparujjati tañca maggaṃ najanāti dukkhassa dukkhupa samagāminam. We read the meaning earlier. Ye dukkhaṃ na pajanāti. Those who do not know dukkha. I think it is very good for us to use the word dukkha at new word to English dictionary rather than using suffering. Why? Because one thing, people don't like to hear the word suffering. Second thing is, according to Western psychology, suffering is a very, very strong term, and you can come up with many different nuances and ask us, is it suffering, and is it suffering, or so forth. Thirdly, the word dukkha cannot be explained or expressed in full with one English word. And therefore, one Pali word is better for us to use to economize words. Na pajanāti, do not know. And dukkhassa samudayam. Now, yatthaca sabbaso dukkhaṃ. The word sabbaso is completely sabbaso completely dukkhaṃ asesaṃ uparujjati. Asesa means without remainder, not even the shade of dukkha, and not any, what you call, anusayas of dukkha. I mentioned last time what anusayas are. Anusaya is like when you sit on a cushion, after a while when you get up, the cushion still is warm because the heat transmitted to the cushion. Similarly, when suffering is eliminated temporarily in ordinary person's minds, suffering's shade continues to lurk underneath. Suffering shade is there. For instance, when we discuss all these things later, when one attains jhanas, attain immaterial, fine material existence and immaterial existence, even in immaterial existence, suffering is there. And therefore, when we eliminate suffering, when the Buddha said eliminate suffering without remainder, it means completely eliminated. Some people think this is humanly impossible. But Buddha, from his own personal experience, tells us that it is humanly possible. Only human beings can do that. And that is, we will discuss this cessation of suffering when we come to that section. It is, we have to use many words to explain what that particular state is. I think it is too premature to say anything right now. So I suspend that for the further future lessons. Then the next is they destitute of liberation of mind and also of liberation by wisdom, incapable of making an end, they fare on to birth and old age. This destitute liberation of mind. Liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom means samatha vipassana. Liberating by liberation of mind through the practice of jhanic meditation, overcoming hindrances, attaining various stages of jhanas, and even reaching a highest level of immaterial state. That path is called samatha jhanika. And the other path is called vipassana jhanika. Vipassana means seeing anicca, dukkha, anatta. Don't get alarmed when I use these three words: impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and selflessness. To seeing these three things, not in words, not intellectually, not in any other way, but in one's own life, in experience. Impermanence, we experience. Suffering or unsatisfactoriness, we experience. Selflessness is we experience. Because of our ignorance, we don't know how to admit it. We keep thinking that things are permanent, things are satisfactory, and us or we have certain permanent, eternal substance called self. Just ask yourself, you don't ask me the answers to these questions, you ask yourself every day. This is how we investigate. This is how we learn. We learn whenever we do, this is what we call mindfulness. In mindfulness practice, the key is always, one word in mindfulness is sati. Sati means memory. What is this memory? What do we remember? We remember everything is impermanent. We must remember that. Everything is unsatisfactory. Whatever is impermanent is unsatisfactory. Whatever is impermanent and unsatisfactory does not have any permanent substance. Okay, this is understanding and right view. When we understand this, then we can end suffering. And those who do not understand are incapable of making an end. They are on, or they fare on to birth and old age and so on. That is what we are. So you can see the depth of ignorance. And then, next answer is, but those who understand suffering and the origin of suffering, who know as well where suffering completely ceases without remainder, and who understand the path that leads to the allowing of suffering. That is also very clear. Yecha dukkhaṃ pajanāti ato dukkhasa sambhavam. I think it is very good to memorize these stanzas for your own personal knowledge. Yecha dukkhaṃ pajanāti, those who know dukkha, ato dukkhasa sambhavam, ato means then, dukkhasa of suffering, sambhavam arising, yattaca sabbaso dukkham asesam uparujyati, where suffering completely ceases, does not exist. Tanchamaggam pajananti, and then the path to that end, dukkha upasamagamina, ending that suffering. Then the last stanza is, they are possessed of mind of liberation and also liberation by wisdom, capable of making an end. They fare no more to birth and old age. Okay. Now we go to the next section. What is ignorance? You can see once again I have summarized, and we have studied many times in the past. Then the style I followed here is the dependent origination. Just like Venerable Sariputta used, not in that same eloquent way, but the style is the same. Now, to make our right understanding, to understand what suffering, what ignorance is, we must remember the 12 steps of the dependent origination. 12 steps. First is not knowing, starting with volitional formations. What do you call sankhara? Sankhara. We go sankhara, viññāna, nāma-rūpa, salayatana, phassa, vedana, tanha, upadana, bhava, jati, jara, marana, soka, parideva, dukkha, domanassa. These are the 12 steps. Not understanding each of these steps in these 4 steps, like not understanding volitional formations, not knowing cause of volitional formations, not knowing the end of volitional formations, not knowing the path leading to the end of volitional formations. What do we have here? What is the pattern we used? Four Noble Truths. Now, to have right understanding or not to have avijja, we must know dependent origination 48 ways. 48 ways. 12 times 4. 48 ways. Each step we must know. We must know volitional formations. What is volitional formations? We will discuss all this. This is just a summary. Volitional formations and the cause of volitional formations, end of volitional formations, and the way to that leads to end volitional formation. If we do not know these 4 steps with regard to volitional formations, we are ignorant. You ask yourself, are you ignorant or not? Yeah? So, next is not knowing consciousness, not knowing the cause of consciousness, not knowing the end of consciousness, not knowing path leading to end of consciousness. So, sankhara, viññāna. That is why at the very beginning I mentioned to you to memorize those 12 steps. Very easy. I think some of you have memorized. I think you memorized, and others, some of our Sri Lankan people memorized, Rupa memorized, Walter memorized, and Kumara memorized, Nanda Kumara. I think he memorized, and few people memorized. You can see when you memorize these 12 steps, and whenever you are alone, ask yourself, am I following the path leading to knowledge, vision, understanding, or am I still ignorant? Okay? So you can test for yourself, by yourself, your state, your level of understanding. I summarize that part, ending nutriment. Nutriment is not in the dependent origination, but you find it in Sammaditthi Sutta. In Sammaditthi Sutta there are 16 steps, and these 16, each of them should be multiplied by 4. How much?
64.
64. If you know these 64 ways, you are still better, you have a higher understanding of Dhamma. And your ignorance reduced to that degree. Not just by memorizing, but just thinking very, very. You have to take some time. Go to a solitary place, quiet place, take this list and ask yourself, how much of this I know? How much of this I know in my personal life? Not by reading books or listening to lectures or calculate and multiply this by this and so forth. But by thinking and asking questions. I think this is a very good subject for somebody to meditate. Okay, next, ignorance. Ignorance makes us see, so ignorance also has a function. Not only keep us in dark and generate delusion, but also it distort our view. How? Impermanence as permanence. Unsatisfactory as satisfactory. Selfless as self. If you ask some of those fellows who are pleasure-oriented and enjoying, involved in deep pleasure, you stop them for a moment and ask them, are you happy? Or do you have any suffering? At once they say, I'm happy, we are happy. We are happy. Why is that? Because where is suffering, there is happiness, there is suffering. This is dependent origination. Where there is happiness, there is suffering. Yo dukkhang abhinandati, yo sukhang abhinandati, so dukkhang abhinandati. One who enjoys pleasure enjoys pain. You buy one, get one free. That is the dependent formula. Dependent origination formula. You cannot get one without the other. These two always come together. So people think things are permanent. You list anything in your life and say, I think this is really, finally, is permanent. I don't have to list anything because some of the items can offend you. So I don't want to mention any item. You yourself ask. Anything you think permanent, in reality is impermanent. Why? Dependent origination applies to that. If you say permanent, impermanence is along with that. If you see impermanent, say permanent, impermanence is right there. If you see something impermanent, permanence is right there. So long as they are mundane. And same goes with everything. Then the next item under not understanding is they do not understand extremes, such as there are so many extremes. I listed only 5 here. One extreme is self-mortification and self-indulgence. We all know that. Those who are very, very religious, eternalist, practice self-mortification. Why? They want to give pain to the body and mind in order to get rid of their defilements. Just like you know some religious sect, they think by not eating, not sleeping, and various things. Is called by wearing out all previous karmas and not committing new karmas, they can attain liberation. And they are religious people. And there is other group of people who are materialists. Materialists, they just don't care. They are indulged in sensual pleasures. They think this is the only life, and therefore eat, drink, and be happy. In India, it's called Charvaka. Charvaka philosophy. Rinam kritva gitam pive. What is that? Bhasmi Bhuta Sudeyasya Punaragamana Nahi. What is the second line? Yavajjive Sukhanjive. Rinam kritva gritam pive. Bhasmi Bhuta Sudeyasya Punaragamana Nahi. In Sanskrit, when you live, enjoy and eat ghee, even when you borrow money to buy ghee and use it. When you die and cremate, you will never come back. This kind of saying you can find in any country, any language. Young people used to think. Now, these are two extremes. On the one hand, you are deprived yourself of all material things. Other extreme is you indulge yourself in pleasure. And Buddha, let me finish this one, eternalism and nihilism. Eternalism and nihilism are the same. Then everything happens due to karma and nothing happens due to karma. That is fatalists. Fatalists think that everything happened due to karma. And the other extreme is nothing happens due to karma, all by accident. That's called adhicca samuppanna. And next is world is finite, world is infinite. Now, Buddha followed the middle path. What is the middle path? I thought you would say Noble Eightfold Path. I mean, not wrong. But the Buddha's middle path is the dependent origination. Depending on this arises. When this arises, this arises. When this exists, this exists. When this passes away, this passes away. That is the path the Buddha followed. Noble Eightfold Path also falls into that category. So, that is why he gave up all extremes and began to follow Noble Eightfold Path. In that, he saw dependent origination. When he followed the Noble Eightfold Path, he saw dependent origination. I think we studied in Indriya Bhavana Sutta. Were you here? Indriya Bhavana Sutta, we discussed that.
Dhatu Bhavana? No.
Maybe Dhatu Bhanga. Dhatu Bhanga, yeah. And then we come to a little higher level of ignorance. Now we started with a very, very basic gross level of ignorance. So we go to high level, little high level. That is not knowing 5 kinds of knowledge. So in the ladder of ignorance, in the ignorance class, we got promotion to higher ignorance class. That is inside knowledge. People who do not know inside knowledge, that means vipassana method, vipassana practice, they are ignorant. Not that everybody practices vipassana are without ignorance. They do have, but they learn how to reduce it slowly, gradually, as they keep practicing. They reduce it. Then they also have ownership of karma. This is called karma sakata knowledge. Karma sakata in Samadhita Sutta number 1 out of the 16, the first is karma.
Wholesome and the wholesome.
Yeah, wholesome and the cause of wholesome. Unwholesome and the cause of unwholesome. So this refers to karma. And we will come to that later on when we discuss sankhara. Then path knowledge, magga. Now, this path knowledge is beginning with stream entry. Phala, next is phala, fruition knowledge is the next of stream entry. Then knowledge of reflection, paccavekkhana. Paccavekkhana, one doesn't have to have enlightenment, but any ordinary person can have paccavekkhana, reflection. Even we all can have paccavekkhana. That is what we do when we, especially monastic, I think lay people also can read the papers. When we eat, we do the paccavekkhana, reflection. Reflect the purpose of eating and reflect on meditation. Yatha paccam pavatmanam dhatumatmavetam, etc. That paragraph is on meditation. All these are paccavekkhana. And therefore, this knowledge can easily deepen our understanding of food, clothes, shelter, medicine. For monastic, these are the requisites. When we use, we are supposed to reflect on them in order to increase our wisdom, in order to reduce our ignorance. Then, another wrong understanding, example of group of examples of ignorance. I think we discussed this even when we talk about Sabbasava Sutta. Sabbasava Sutta number 1. Sabbasava Sutta has 7 steps. And I don't think you remember them. Our problem is we learn and then leave them here for us to keep. And you go home. Eh?
Yeah, I think it was the class number 1 you had talked about that.
That is very important to remember. To recap, 7 steps of overcoming influxes, asava. That's called it was sabba asava. All reflection, all influxes. You seem to be, your memory, you seem to remember that.
Okay, the first one is by abandoning, destroying by seeing.
Yeah?
Uh,
Let me make it
I
easy.
forgot.
No, I don't blame you because,
No, by seeing, by restraining, by using,
yeah,
by enduring, by avoiding.
by vision.
Yeah.
This comes under vision. Then by restraint, samvara. Then patisevana,
Using.
using. Then parivajjana, avoiding. Then adhivasana means tolerating. Then vinodana, mentally abandoning. And then bhavana, meditation. So these are 7 steps of the, or 7 steps you have to follow to overcome asavas. Now, if we do not have this kind of reflections, we will have our ignorance. We are ignorant of these 6 things. And Sabbasava Sutta says, number 1, you can overcome, abandon, destroy influxes by reflecting, by seeing. That means you reduce ignorance of that particular step. I have self, I have no self. With the self, I perceive the self. With that which is no self, I perceive the self. With self, I perceive that which is not self. This is very, hair-splitting, tiny, nitty-gritty details of the way the people think of self. But they do think in this way. And if you do not think in this way, to that extent, in that section, in that part, we are not ignorant. So avidya is, so Buddha said, with these views in mind, he adopts the following views. What is that? This myself, which can think and feel and which now here, now there, experiences the fruit of good and evil, this self is permanent, stable, eternal, not subject to change, and will thus certainly remain the same. We have discussed this several times. Ordinarily, people cannot think without thinking of I. Right? We always think in terms of I. Thinking in terms of I is not wrong. We have to think. But thinking this I is a permanent I is the problem. Thinking that I is something permanent, something that exists, just put down and stable. It never changes. That is the problem. That is why we have ignorance. But using I, he, she, you, and all these conventional terms is perfectly all right. The difference is, one is acceptable conventional term and other is thinking that that term is permanent. I gave many times, I gave one example. The same example I can give you once again for you to think. Today is Saturday. Have you seen Saturday? Have you touched Saturday? Smelled Saturday? Is there anything to see Saturday? No. But we have to use it. When we schedule classes, we have to say, we have class at Saturday at such and such a time. For this purpose, we have to use the word Saturday. Because this is what conventionally, when Gregory or somebody finalized the calendar, whoever made the calendar, they divided the years, months, weeks, days, hours, and so on and so forth. So the whole world accepted this, and whole world used it. But nobody has ever seen Capricorn, equator, longitude, latitude, international date light. Nobody has seen it. I have walked one day on international date line in Fiji Island. When we went to see a tomb of a man who ate 99 people. He was a cannibal. We went to, so they had the memorial there, tomb. So our guide took us there. When we were going, he said, if you step to the left, you are yesterday. If you step to the right, you are tomorrow. You are walking today. That is where the international date line crosses. But I did not see that. Nobody saw it. But it is very, very important thing for us to use. Similarly, without any hesitation, we must use the word I. We don't feel guilty, bad. But at the same time, use I as a conventional term. This I notion, there's a very beautiful discourse in Samyutta Nikaya. I think we all should know the discourse. This, what I'm saying here is not out of my class. These are all we should know. In Samyutta Nikaya, there's a discourse called Khemaka Sutta. Venerable Khemaka was very sick, and there were some elderly monks. They sent a messenger monk, his name was Dasama. He sent Dasama to Khemaka, the group of elderly monks sent Dasama to Khemaka, asking him to go and find out how he was doing. So he went and asked how he was doing. He said, I am in pain, my pain is increasing, it never decreases, I am in a very, very uncomfortable position. So he came back and reported it to the community of other elderly monks. Then they sent him again, go and ask, is he attached to body? So he went and asked. He said, I am not attached to the body. Khemaka said. He came back and reported this to the elderly monk. Then elderly monk said, then he must be an Arahant. Ask him, go and ask him whether he is an Arahant. He said, I am not Arahant, I still have pain. So he came and reported. So they went and asked him to, is he attached to the feeling? Then he came and reported. So when it was happening so many times, Khemaka was, even he was very sick and weak, he said, enough, get me the walking stick, let me walk to them. With the walking stick, he slowly walked to them. And he sat down. Then they asked him the same questions. Then he said, I am not attached to body, feeling, perception, and so forth. I am not attached to any of these 5 aggregates. Then they asked, you must be an Arahant. He said, I am not Arahant, but I am not attached to them either. Then they asked him to explain. He explained. as he was explaining, he said, gave a simile. He said, there is a lotus, blue, red, white, whatever. This lotus has fragrance. Where is this fragrance? In the petal, stalk, its nectar, in leaves. Where is this fragrance? They say fragrance is all over. He said, similarly, I have the attachment, I have the notion of self, I. Then he said, in order to, while he was teaching, explaining his situation to these monks, Venerable Khemaka also was very deeply thinking. He was not just not giving an explanation to these monks, but he was thinking very carefully what he was saying. And he said, suppose you have clothes, you give it to a laundryman. He washes the clothes, bring it back. Then the laundry detergent will smell will still be there. Then what would you do? You use a deodorizer, some kind of deodorizer, to get rid of this smell. As he was explaining to them, he attained enlightenment, and all these monks attained enlightenment. What is this deodorizer? This notion of I. In order to get rid of this notion of I, what is the deodorizer we have to use?
Get rid of ignorance.
Greed
That is so part of ignorance.
and greed, both of them, right? Isn't it that it's the union of ignorance with greed that gives the I?
Let me make it easy for you, because for everybody. I notion exists until you attain enlightenment. Even in the anagami stage you have. It's called asmimana. Asmimana. In order to get rid of that, you must have 100% clear, perfect understanding of impermanence. 100%. Not 50%. Impermanence. Impermanence, you must have knowledge, awareness, insight, experience of impermanence. Only then can you get rid of that notion of self. That is how one attains full enlightenment. Until such time, our awareness of impermanence is 10%, 15%, maximum maybe 50%, and so forth.
Okay, how do we know it's 100% or not?
I'm told I'm using percentage.
Yeah, but how would we know how good our understanding of impermanence is?
Veronique, I must say, there is no gauge, measure, to measure somebody's level of understanding of ignorance, self. But oneself, one must ask oneself very introspectively, impartially, without any bias. One must honestly look at oneself introspectively. That is the only way. No other way. Pachattam vetabbo vinyuhi. Each and every wise individual understands it by oneself. So we have to be wise. And that is why Venerable Khemaka, although he had an anagami state, he still had this notion of self, I am, but only when he was explaining this to other monks, he began to reflect on himself. And that moment, this is the only place where we can see the preacher and the audience attain enlightenment simultaneously. So, you can see the last residue of ignorance. Last residue of ignorance is I am. I am. Until such time, don't break your neck to get rid of I am.
Is that the mana?
Huh?
Is that the mana concept?
Mana.
Is the mana?
That's why it is called Asmimana. Asmimana. Then we study this abstaining from the wholesome and the root of unwholesome, and so forth. Abstaining from 10 unwholesome, there's a typo, it should be unwholesome action. Abstain from. But then practicing these 10 wholesome actions, generosity, morality, meditation, and so forth. I will discuss these things in detail because when we come to Sankhara, I want to show you what Sankhara leads to attainment of enlightenment, what Sankhara leads us to go to next life, heavenly life, divine, human life, and so forth. So Sankharas have two branches. One Sankhara type goes to rebirth, another Sankhara type goes to attaining liberation. I will discuss this later now. There are so many things to say here. Okay. See, these are the 10 unprofitable questions. These are very popular unprofitable questions. You can read in any Buddhist text. Whether the world is eternal or temporary, whether the world is finite or infinite, and so on. I try to skip going through all these things in detail because I want to finish this class today so that we can start the other one next time. And if you have any doubt about this, please don't hesitate to ask me. Now, have I been in the past? Have I not been in the past? In this series of questions, in the Buddhist, when Buddha attained enlightenment, he gained 3 knowledges. And also I mentioned, I think, that type of 3 knowledges triggered him to start dependent origination. One of those 3 knowledges is seeing his own previous lives. So, have I been in the past? Is a question some people ask with regard to previous lives. Now, and Buddha himself said that he had previous lives. Trusting the Buddha, we also can say, Buddha said that he had previous lives. We also might have had previous lives. Have I been in the past? Have I not been in the past? These are very genuine questions. But the problem is, have I been in the past? Have I that permanent eternal I in the past. Not conventional I, not the five aggregates. All the five aggregates we call I. A convention that is acceptable. And also, as I mentioned, the word I we can accept conventionally. But to believe that there is a permanent I is the problem. And that is what implied by these questions. Okay, if for instance, present this series of questions also you can see where? Sabbasava Sutta. Okay. And also there's a dependent origination, what do you call, circular dependent origination. Circular dependent origin. It is not mentioned ascending order and descending order. The popular version is ascending order and descending order. That is how we started. But there is another dependent origination step series of steps as given here. You can see in your handout, depending on ignorance, errors, evolution, formations, and so on. Now when we come to last one, number 11, depending on birth, arise aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. When you have suffering, I think I mentioned it in the last class. What do we do with suffering? When we have suffering, there are two possibilities. One is we can simply keep suffering. We don't know what to do, just suffer. And the other is seeking help. So somebody who is suffering, everybody is suffering, but somebody has faith that this suffering can be eliminated. That's the faith. And they would do anything, they would sacrifice anything to get rid of suffering. If you sacrifice $1 million, you can get $1 million pleasure or $1 million happiness. If you sacrifice $1 billion, you can get $1 billion happiness. Similarly, if you sacrifice certain amount of ignorance, certain amount of greed, certain amount of hatred, to that degree, proportionately, you get happiness. Okay? And then you have faith. I have done such and such, I got this result. From your own personal commitment, you discovered that you have a potential, that you have power, and that to get out of this dilemma, this predicament. So, that is what is called faith. And then, when you have faith, what happened? You say, gee, I found it. I found it. What happened? You are full of joy. Because you are suffering so much, and after sacrificing so much, you found this light at the end of the tunnel to come out, then you are happy, you have joy. Then after joy you have gladness. I think last time I explained these things, joy, degree of joy, happiness, and so forth. I don't know, everybody remember all these things. And then pamojja, gladness, from their tranquility, from tranquility arise happiness, from happiness concentration, concentrated and yathabhuta jnana dasana, and yathabhuta jnana dasana depending on the knowledge and vision of things as they really are, revulsion. Now, once again, we use this word things as they really are. Yatha bhuta jnana dasana. What does this mean? Yatha bhuta jnana dasana. Seeing things as they really are. These words, friends, we must not try to find out things as they really are out there. Things as they really are right here. 5 aggregates. See the 5 aggregates exactly as they are. How are they? How are they? They are always in a state of flux, changing. From the moment we start breathing, we begin to see oxygen condition this body. That is why asasa pasasa, inhaling, exhaling is called body conditioner. We have to remember this. Body conditioner means the body conditioner. Inhaling and exhaling conditions this body by bringing oxygen. For every cell in this body to live, there must be oxygen. Everybody agrees. And therefore we, inhaling, exhaling, keep pumping fresh oxygen. Keep pumping. Why? So many times? Because they are wearing out. The oxygen that we breathe once absorbed into the bloodstream and went through the cells and then finish, disappear. We don't know where, it disappeared. Inside, oxygen absorbed, disappears. That oxygen you will never see again. Never see again. No matter how much science we have, no scientific method can extract oxygen from the body. Because once it is gone, gone forever. And then new oxygen, new oxygen, new oxygen. To keep this body in good shape. And therefore inhaling, exhaling is called body conditioner. Body conditioner. Now, when inhaling, exhaling keeps conditioning this body, it conditions feeling, perception, thought, volitional formations, and everything. Along with that, keep changing. When one thing changes, because these are dependently arising. They are all interdependent. And therefore, yatha bhuta jnana dasana means vision and knowledge of this reality that takes place in our body to the 5 aggregates. In vipassana meditation, in any meditation, if somebody wants to be very serious, must know how this body functions. I know many of you have studied biology, physics, chemistry, and so on. But they are out there. I don't think many of us go to any science lab to study ourselves. That lab is here in us. That science lab is here. And we keep looking at this lab, honestly, sincerely, removing all these other conditioning. This is not easy thing. That is why doing this is not easy. That is why we continue to be in ignorance. We continue to be ignorant. Now the moment, just like Venerable Khemaka, last moment, he began to look at himself, look inside, where this I lodged, stuck. There's no. Everything is changing. When everything is changing, he has no reason to grasp anything. Then there arises nibbida, revulsion. The word revulsion also is unpalatable word if you do not understand the meaning. Revulsion is just the opposite of clinging, attachment, and so on. This body is not there either to become attached or discard. We cannot discard this body. We have to live in this body. But more we are attached to it, more suffering we have. So when we have Yatha Bhuta Jnana Darsana, as the body, feeling, perception and so forth, five aggregates as they are, then while using the body, we have to eat, drink, clothes, sleep, use medicine for your sicknesses and so on to get cured. And yet, without greed, clinging, attachment, we can do that. And then when we see body, the aggregates as they are, then we don't become attached, nor detached, but revulse. Revulsion meaning not just to become repulsive and ugly and so forth. It is a very matured, wise attitude towards our own body, to accept it exactly as it is. You remember in Patikula Manasikara discourse when we discussed Mahasatipatthana, when we 60 monks committed suicide. You can see this report in Vinaya Pitaka and Samyutta Nikaya. By hating the body. They hated the body, and then they said, this body is so ugly, dirty, so repulsive. We don't want to live in this body. Some committed suicide by themselves. Others asked other monks to cut their head off and committed suicide. In another incident, when there was Sariputta's student, who also was given Patikula Manasikara to practice meditation, when he was practicing, his lust increased. Sariputta gave him this subject to reduce his lust, but when he was practicing, lust increased. That is the other extreme. One extreme is rejecting, other extreme is clinging. Revulsion is in between. Neither. I think I mentioned several times, you have beautiful hair. Just after coming from hairdresser. Clean, neat, showered, shampoos, and so forth and so on. Beautiful hair. With this hair on the head, you eat your soup. One hair falls into the bowl of soup. What do? You throw away the whole bowl. 1 second before it was so beautiful. Next second became ugly. Is it real? This is our attitude. This body is neither ugly or beautiful. Buddha asks us to use things exactly as they are. Just like very wise, intelligent scientists look at a feces under microscope. When he or she look at the feces, he doesn't run away from the smell and composition of feces, but he or she wants to know it exactly as it is, its conditions, cells, cancer, diabetes, whatever they wanted to find out, impartially, he or she looked at the piece of feces. Similarly, when we use our body to meditate, don't reject the body, thinking that it is ugly. There are a lot of stories in Buddhist literature, particularly more in commentaries, but we can see in text as well. When they misunderstood the body, they committed offenses, even crimes. And therefore, yatha bhuta jnana darsana, as we say here, seeing knowledge and vision of things as they really are. Things here means not this anything outside. With outside things you can never see as they are. But with wisdom, with mindfulness, reflecting ourselves introspectively, impartially, then we see us as we are. For instance, I am jealous of somebody. Don't ask, why is so and so, why is such and such. Don't ask. That is not that person's problem. That is my problem. I must look at my mind. Why am I jealous? I have greed, I have hatred, I have ignorance. For many reasons, I have ignorance. And therefore, jealousy arises in me. So I must find the solution within myself, asking ourselves. So, the revulsion is like that. Then, depending on revulsion arises dispassion. Viraga. Raga is two meaning. One is color and the other is gluing, attachment to something, raga. So that attachment will not be there when we see things as they really are. Then, depending on dispassion arises liberation, vimutti. And then, depending on liberation arises the knowledge and of destruction, of defilements. Vimutti jnana darsana, then knowledge and vision of liberation. This discourse you can find in Samyutta Nikaya called Upanishad Sutta. And I think, friends, this may be enough for today's Dhamma talk. And then if you have any further questions, you can ask now. I don't think anything is recorded here. I forgot to press one button anyway.
Any questions?
Okay. Any question?
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
So you advise us to practice with inner introspection, the 12 steps of Paticcasamuppada. But how do you practice it? Do you start at the beginning, or you become aware of one of the links that is more prominent? For example, you can become aware of clinging, and then you start at clinging, and then you follow the other ones. Or do you try and go to the beginning, ignorance, and follow all the links like that? How do you do it?
You know, when we go through this course, you will see Paticcasamuppada, you can start from any part.
Okay.
From Jati Jara Marana, that is Vipassana Bodhisattva. It is very interesting. Vipassana Bodhisattva, there are 7 Buddhas mentioned in Samyutta Nikaya: Vipassana, Siti, Vesabu, Kakusanta, Konagama, Kassapa, Gotama. These 7. Our Buddha has reported that Vipassana Buddha went from Jati Jara Marana, birth, decay, death, and sorrow, and so forth, and then went on reverse order. And then he did not come down from reverse order to forward order. From there he said, I found insight to liberate from samsara. Because Vipassana Bodhisattva is, according to records, is more intelligent than Gautama Buddha. And therefore he needed only very little to develop his insight. So somebody, this is an example, somebody who takes only one aspect and go in reverse order or forward order, that is one way of learning dependent origination. Learning dependent origination is learning little by little is not difficult, provided we always keep in mind the formula.
So the most important thing is to see the arising and the thesis, the ceasing and then the arising.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter which link it is, as long as you're very clear about seeing the arising. And when this one arises, the other one arises. Or if you go backwards to see it ceasing.
Yes. Yes. You must see when one arises, the other arises. Not exactly the name you find in the discourse. Anything, for instance, when birth arises, we expect decay, death, sorrow, lamentation. No. When birth arises, suffering arises along with the birth. That is why the whole life, 5 aggregates Buddha called dukkha khanda. Khanda means aggregate. Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana are the 5 aggregates. And all of them put together also he called dukkha khanda, aggregate of suffering. Say, for instance, you take another a step of the dependent origination like thought, volitional formations. As soon as the volitional formations arises, ignorance is there, desire is there, and along with the volitional formations, one moment desire arises, next moment greed arises, what is called ignorance arises. So, volition formations, when volition formations arises, greed arises. When volition formations arises, ignorance arises. And so forth. Because all these factors of the dependent origination links to the following factor or previous factor.
But in literature, the term dependent origination and dependent co-arising is used. So,
Yeah?
so I mean, either one is okay, or when we have the co-arising versus origination.
Co-arising also is good. I don't quarrel with that, because when one arises, the other arises as well. Always go two arises. Always there are two at any given time of any given state. There are two, and therefore co-arising is also good.
But they are. Oh, you go ahead. No, you go ahead.
Bhante, can you have more than two? For example, one arises and then the time is very short and it's like, like a bunch, like a group, a cluster.
Now they are simultaneous. For the simultaneity, you cannot separate when something arises simultaneously, you cannot separate them by time. They arise together. When one arises, other arises. I don't know, any mathematician can tell me. I don't know anything about mathematics. Whether there is any way to separate two objects that arise simultaneously. Simultaneity means it is arising at the same time. There is no way to separate them. So, when ignorance arises, exactly at the same moment, along with the ignorance, either greed arises, or hatred arises, confusion arises, consciousness arises, and so forth. Keep asking questions at every class. We try to clarify them. If my clarification is not very clear, don't hesitate to ask me further questions, not the same day. Because the same day I get tired. Slowly. Every word I use, tiredness arises. Dependent.
So, Bhante, why is the word? So, why is the term sankhara used instead of karma?
I think
For another day.
another day. It's the wrong time to ask that beautiful question. Very good question.
Yeah.
But the time is not suitable. Why? Because I'm going to discuss this.
Yeah.
Sankhara as karma. For now, I can give you some general answer. Sankhara is, there are three characteristics of sankhara. Upado panyati, vayo panyati, titasanya tattam panyati. These are three characteristics. In that respect, this is sankhara. This is sankhara. This sankhara. Everything sankhara. This sankhara. Everything. Animate, inanimate, far, near, long, short, gross or subtle is sankhara. In that widest sense of the term. Karma is a very specific sankharas. specific sankharas, for which there must be will, wish, chetana. If there is no chetana, it's not karma. And therefore, we have to make the distinction between karma and sankhara. Although karma falls under the category of sankhara, but the sankhara is a wider term. Karma is a very narrow term.
Any other questions?
So, sorry, I wasn't here for all the lessons, but which suttas are these lessons? Like, which suttas should I read to sort of understand?
I think you read the Samyutta Nikaya. There is a whole section called Nidana Samyutta, Samyutta number 22. There are, I think, a couple of hundreds of pages. Okay?
But the Mahanidana Sutra, is that the one that has the general?
Mahanidana,
No, what is that?
Mahanidana, right? Mahanidana is another discourse you find in Digha Nikaya, Sutta number 15, Digha Nikaya. That also discusses dependent origination. No, I wish I have time to discuss all these things. Not today, but in the course of our lessons. Because something that in this dependent origination has some relation to Mahanidana Sutta. Mahanidana Sutta has two sections of dependent origination. One has 9 steps, other has 9 steps, but it's very, very profound discourse. We will discuss all this in detail.
I think it's good.
My recording didn't work.
Didn't work?
No,
Didn't
didn't
work
get started.
because